Now beginning our 26th year, a quarter of a century of service to the worldwide amateur radio community, we are This Week in Amateur Radio. Your all-amateur radio and technology news magazine and bulletin service of the air. This is edition number 1377 with a release and air date of Saturday, July 19, 2025. Please take the program to your F following the cue tone.
Heard every week on the amateur radio bands all around the world, broadcast on low-power AM and FM stations all across the United States, and podcast on the internet since 1993, we are This Week in Amateur Radio. The worldwide premier amateur radio and technology news magazine and bulletin service of the air. Here are the stories for release around the earth as we come to air with edition number 1377 of This Week in Amateur Radio. AST Space Mobile Satellites are granted an experimental license that includes operation on amateur spectrum. Meanwhile, the opposition to their operation continues. The ARRL and Radio Relay International sign a Memorandum of Understanding. Flex Radio equips ARRL and W1AW with a complete Flex Radio 8000 series station. The FCC Emergency Alert System reformation is added to the FCC priorities list. Canadian amateurs in the Yukon Territory get a separate Radio Amateurs of Canada section. The FCC proposes fast-track regulation to streamline obsolete rules. A recent solar storm caused the U.S. Global Positioning System to be off by 70 meters. The FCC regains its ability to hold spectrum auctions. Ham Shack Hotline decides to hang up and discontinue the service at the end of August. And, let's go with the flow, there is a new, rather unique special event station coming up, or should we say going down? We will tell you all about it in this week's report. These headline stories will come to you in a moment, along with this week's special features. We'll visit with Bruce Page, KK5DO, and get an update from AMSAT and what's new with all those amateur satellites in orbit. Australia's own Onno Benschop, VK6FLAB, and Foundations of Amateur Radio will talk about various ways of decoding a signal. Our original amateur radio historian, the late Bill Continelli, W2XOY returns with a special encore presentation of a classic edition of the Ancient Amateur Archives. This week, Bill takes us back in time to teach us all about the early warning communication system known in the United States as CONELRAD. And we will stop by and visit with Bill Salier's AJ8B in the DX Corner, with all the latest news on DXpeditions, DX, upcoming radio sport contests, and more. That's all straight ahead as North America's premier amateur radio and technology news magazine and bulletin service, This Week in Amateur Radio, takes to the air right now. Reporting from our headquarters studio in upstate New York, this is W2XBS.
And reporting from our news bureau in Sandwich, Illinois, where the weather is as crazed as a squirrel in the middle of the road, I'm Jordan Kurtz. Kilo Echo 9, Bravo, Papa Oscar.
And reporting from our news bureau in Rochester, New York, along the southern shore of Lake Ontario, I'm Dave Wilson, WA2HOY.
Reporting from our headquarters studios here in Naugatuck, Connecticut, where it's cloudy but not as hot as recent weekends, I'm Steve Sawyer, K1FRC.
And reporting from our news bureau just outside Albany, New York, in the Geek Cave studios, I'm Rich Lawrence, KB2MOB.
And reporting from our news bureau in the village of Hilton, New York, this is George, Kilo Charlie 2, Oscar X-Ray Juliet.
And reporting live from the warm and humid Space Coast in Florida, I am Ed Johnson, W2PH.
And reporting from our news bureau in Knoxville, Tennessee, where it sure is hot here in the dog days of summer, I'm Josh Marlor, AA4WX.
And reporting from our Trey, New York news bureau, where the Queen Anne's Lace is just opening, I'm Eric, Kilo Delta 2, Romeo Juliet X-Ray.
And reporting from our radio outpost in the Catskill Mountains of upstate New York, where the first sweet corn of the season is being picked now. And let me attest in the words of Jackie Gleason, how sweet it is. I'm Don Hulick, K2ATJ.
And reporting from our news bureau in Fayetteville, Arkansas, where summer is living up to her reputation, read hotter than Hades, I'm Will Rogers, K5WLR, Sweating Buckets.
The FCC has approved an experimental license for the satellite of a 5G mobile provider, and the license approves use of some amateur radio frequencies. AST Space Mobile, the Texas-based rival of SpaceX, has been approved for an experimental license to test a low Earth orbit satellite that is the prototype for its planned mobile phone connectivity from space. The U.S. Federal Communication Commission granted the license on Friday, July 11th, giving the company the ability to test a satellite that has a phased array antenna that enables it to function as a cell tower from space. Known as FM-1, it is at the center of the 5G broadband provider's hopes to build a satellite-to-phone internet system. The FCC has assigned the call sign WP2XRX, which expires July 1st, 2027. A copy of the license online shows that it authorizes experimental operation only on the 37.5 GHz through 42 GHz and 2.235 GHz and 2.245 GHz for mobile satellite services. The amateur radio frequencies 430 through 440 MHz also appear on the license. The 5G service requested those frequencies to conduct telemetry, tracking, and telecommand between ground stations and its satellites. The company seeks FCC approval for operation of 248 low Earth orbit, non-geostationary satellites. Its present license only permits 5. AST Space Mobile has been developing its network in association with AT&T and Verizon. SpaceX is partnering with T-Mobile.
Meanwhile, AST Space Mobile and NextNav continue to receive pushback from groups opposing the potential encroachment of amateur radio spectrum by these companies. Communications Daily reports that Connected Devices for America Coalition held a meeting with the Federal Communications Commission voicing their concerns over NextNav's proposed restructuring of the 900 MHz band. The coalition described the band as a workhorse for unlicensed innovation. Separately, an amateur radio operator based in Germany has filed a petition with the FCC to oppose AST Space Mobile's request to utilize and take control of the portions of the 70-centimeter band which is allocated as secondary to amateur radio use. The comment period for AST Space Mobile's request to utilize amateur spectrum is open through July 21, 2025.
The National Association for Amateur Radio, ARRL, and the Radio Relay International have signed a Memorandum of Understanding. The formal agreement outlines the value of the organizations that they find in cooperating together. Radio Relay International, or RRI, was established in 2016 to enhance and promote effective nationwide messaging and emergency communications. Since its founding, RRI has developed an extensive work product consisting of a wide variety of training programs, a tested and evolved national response plan, and communications facilities designed to better prepare radio amateurs to serve their community in times of emergency. Central to these goals has been the modernization of the national traffic system. The National Traffic System, created by ARRL in 1949, is a network of trained amateur radio operators who ensure the rapid transmission and relay of messages. In addition to basic voice and Morse code CW communications networks, the NTS has recently modernized through the addition of the Digital Traffic Network, as well as interoperable messaging gateways and specialized software templates developed in association with the WinLink development team, which operates an international radio email service well suited to disaster response. Through last year's hurricanes and the recent devastating floods in Texas, we're seeing amateur radio continue to be a vital tool before and during times of crisis, said ARRL Director of Emergency Management Josh Johnston, KE5MHV. Amateur radio works when all else fails, and traffic handling is an important part of that, he said. Future plans for the improvement of the national traffic system include the development of additional robust HF digital networks, improved interoperability with local and state emergency communications orgs, and continued development of local and regional VHF and UHF digital packet radio networks. Coordination between RRI and ARRL will play an important role in achieving these goals.
You're listening to North America's premier amateur radio and technology news magazine of the air. We are This Week in Amateur Radio, distributed worldwide at twiar.net.
The Federal Communications Commission announced plans this month to vote on a new fast-track procedure aimed at removing outdated regulations more efficiently without the need for the traditional public notice and comment process. In a draft rule released on Thursday, the FCC proposes eliminating an initial set of 18 obsolete regulations. The agency also seeks to empower FCC staff with delegated authority to use this streamlined direct final rule process in the future, provided actions comply with the Administrative Procedures Act. This direct final rule approach allows the FCC to act swiftly in repealing regulations that no longer serve the public interest, bypassing the usual lengthy rulemaking procedures. Citing a 2001 D.C. Circuit decision, Utility Solid Waste Activities Group versus the EPA, the FCC emphasizes its authority to remove rules that are impractical, unnecessary, or contrary to the public interest without prior notice and comment when such rules have minimal impact on industry and the public. FCC Chair Brendan Carr, who launched the Delete, Delete, Delete initiative earlier this year, is leading the effort to simplify the removal of outdated regulations. The proposed repeal mainly targets legacy regulations governing common carriers, including several cable rate rules that the FCC describes as obsolete due to technological advancements and changing marketplace conditions. The provisions set for repeal plainly do not serve the public interest any longer because they govern obsolete technology, outdated marketplace conditions, expired deadlines, or repealed legal obligations, the FCC stated in an accompanying fact sheet. If approved, the new rule would automatically repeal identified regulations absent any significant adverse comments, while still providing an opportunity for public input on the agency's assessment. Additionally, the proposal clarifies that FCC bureaus and offices can utilize this fast-track procedure in other cases where prior notice and comment are deemed unnecessary, allowing for efficient regulatory updates with requiring a full commission vote. The FCC underscores its commitment to proceed with transparency and at the full commission level for the initial set of repeals planned for July, reflecting a history of eliminating outdated or unwarranted regulations. The FCC is currently controlled by a narrow Republican majority, with a one-vote margin following Commissioner Olivia Trustee's recent appointment. Representatives for Democratic Commissioner Ana Gomez were unavailable for comment.
This Week in Amateur Radio received the following press release from Ham Shack Online. To our valued Ham Shack Online community, it is with a heavy heart that we announce the sunset of the Ham Shack Hotline project, effective August 29, 2025. What began in 2018 as a simple idea in the humble closet of K1WIZ quickly grew into something none of us could have imagined, an expensive global communications network built by and for amateur radio operators. From those early beginnings, Ham Shack Online evolved into a robust VoIP system supported by multiple servers around the world with over 7,000 interconnections at its peak. This incredible journey was made possible by the generosity of donors worldwide and the tireless commitment of the Ham Shack Hotline team, who volunteered their time and expertise to support and grow the network. Your trust and participation helped shape Ham Shack Hotline into a valuable and widely respected resource for the ham radio community. However, with success came scale, and with scale came increasing demands. As the network grew, so did the workload on our small team. Balancing this effort with our responsibilities to family, careers, and life outside the shack has become increasingly challenging. We have always taken great pride in the reliability and service standards of Ham Shack Hotline, and we recognize that we can no longer maintain those standards at the level our users deserve. After much thoughtful discussion and reflection, the Board of Directors has unanimously voted to sunset the project, giving our community ample time to transition to other services by the end date. This was not an easy decision. We know how much this network means to many of you, and it means just as much to us. Ham Shack Hotline was built with love, run with dedication, and supported by an incredible community that made it all worthwhile. In the spirit of giving back, the remaining cash reserves of Ham Shack Hotline, after settling final operating expenses, will be donated to a charity that supports veterans. We'll announce the recipient of this donation soon. From the bottom of our hearts, we thank each and every one of you for being part of Ham Shack Hotline. Whether you joined us on day one or just discovered the network, your involvement helped shape something truly special in the amateur radio world. 73 from the Ham Shack Hotline team, where hams connect, 2018 to 2025.
There is a new addition to Studio One at W1AW, the Hiram Percy Maxim Memorial Station at ARRL headquarters in Newington, Connecticut. A complete station of the latest gear from Flex Radio, including a Flex 8600 Signature Series SDR transceiver, a Maestro C control console, Power Genius XL amplifier, and Radio Sport RS60 CF headset. For more details on the recent addition of the Flex system, we go to League headquarters where John Ross, KD8 IDJ, files this report.
There is a new addition to Studio One at W1AW, a complete station of the latest gear from Flex Radio, including a Flex 8600 Signature Series SDR transceiver, a Maestro C control console, Power Genius XL PGXL amplifier, and Radio Sport RS60CF headset. The equipment is the latest addition to W1AW, which hosts a complement of equipment in each of 3 operating studios under rotating agreements with major amateur radio manufacturers. During his visit to present the station to ARRL on Wednesday, July 16, 2025, Flex Radio Chief Technology Officer Stephen Hicks, N5AC, described the station as an addition for the benefit of ARRL members and all visitors to W1AW. ARRL President Rick Roderick, K5UR, and CEO David Minster, NA2AA, were on hand to receive the equipment on behalf of ARRL. The Flex 8600 provides all of the latest features that we have, said Hicks, and with all the Flex radios, they are continuously being upgraded, so we have software releases on an ongoing basis and add features and functionality to it. ARRL members can come in here and try this equipment out and get used to it. ARRL Director of Marketing and Innovation Bob Inderbenson, NQ1R, expressed gratitude for the collaboration with Flex Radio, saying, "We're grateful to have W1AW equipped with a full Flex radio station, allowing members and visitors to operate and enjoy this current generation technology when they come to experience the latest in amateur radio innovation." Inderbenson explained that ARRL's partnership with Flex Radio is an ongoing arrangement with manufacturing, highlighting a shared commitment with the industry to advance amateur radio by offering a hands-on experience to W1AW visitors. I'm John Ross, KD8IDJ.
Hicks and his Flex Radio colleague Tony Brock Fisher, K1KP, also provided a highly informative presentation to ARRL staff on the forthcoming Flex Radio Aurora series of 500-watt SDR transceivers. Their talk highlighted the radio's innovative use of polar modulation to address intermodulation distortion, a common challenge in linear amplification methods, while also reducing power consumption and heat generation. The technology has made it possible to reduce the weight and footprint of a high-power HF station into a lightweight radio that can easily travel as an airline carry-on.
The Federal Communications Commission regained its ability to hold spectrum auctions when President Trump signed the One Big Beautiful Bill into law on July 4th. The FCC's auction authority had lapsed since March 2023. Reinstating the FCC auction authority wasn't the only good news for wireless. The law calls for the government to identify at least 800 megahertz of spectrum to be auctioned between the 1.3 gigahertz to 10.5 gigahertz range, with exceptions for the 3.1 to 3.45 gigahertz and 7.4 to 8.4 gigahertz bands that are currently occupied by military services. Of course, the organization representing the big 3 wireless carriers was elated over the passage of the legislation, even though it apparently removes the possibility for the industry to get hold of the lower 3 gigahertz band that it so desired for many years. CTIA President and CEO Ajit Pai thanked Trump for his extraordinary leadership and vision, particularly on wireless issues during this process. This legislation represents an historic milestone in wireless innovation. It will encourage next-generation wireless technologies, accelerate wireless deployment for the benefit of all American consumers, and secure our global technology leadership, Pai said in a statement.
You are listening to This Week in Amateur Radio, available to download as a podcast from anywhere on the web podcasts are available.
Some 32% of global semiconductor production could face climate change-related copper supply disruptions by 2035, quadrupling from today's levels, advisory firm PricewaterhouseCoopers has said in a report for business leaders. Chile, the world's largest copper producer, already grapples with water shortages that are slowing down production. By 2035, most of the 17 countries supplying the chip industry with copper will be at risk of drought. The last fuel chip shortage, fueled by a pandemic-driven demand spike that coincided with factory shutdowns, crippled the automotive industry and halted production lines across the other chip-dependent sectors. Copper mines from China, Australia, Peru, Brazil, the U.S., Democratic Republic of Congo, Mexico, Zambia, and Mongolia will also be affected, sparing none of the world's chip-making regions from risk, PricewaterhouseCoopers has said.
Electricity is a killer. About 150 people die each year at work from contact with electricity. According to the Electrical Safety Foundation International, half of those are from contact with power lines. That data is just workplace deaths, so recreational and public service volunteering aren't even accounted for. In a recent article, ARRL New Mexico section manager Bill Matter, K-A-T-E, shared safety concerns and processes that can be implemented at ARRL Field Day sites. I'd like to share a simple phrase that may enhance your situational awareness. Look up and live. Here with more details on this important topic is John Ross, KD8IDJ, and Sierra Harrop, W5DX, who share this special report.
Electricity is a necessary component of any amateur radio station, but overhead power lines can be deadly, especially for portable operations. ARRL Public Relations and Outreach Manager Sierra Harrop, W5DX, joins us now from Newington. And Sierra, you have some safety tips that could help keep hams safe, back from your TV news days.
Yeah, it's just a simple phrase, look up and live. And it's something that was drilled into us back in the day when TV news was done with pneumatic masts out of live trucks and steerable dishes on set. Yeah, absolutely. You'd often get to a scene and you were in a hurry, you were trying to get on the air, the assignment desk was blowing up your walkie-talkie or your cell phone later to get the live shot up. But you had to take the moment and you had to look up and live. We recently had a story where one of our fellow amateur radio operators, it appears, may have put a mast into a power line and unfortunately became a silent key because of it. And it's just a tragedy. And so I wanted to put together some of the safety information that I had from that TV news world with the phrase, look up and live. And what we used to do when we'd get there, we would walk outside of the live truck about 20 feet around, walk the circumference, looking up, making sure there's no obstructions, making sure there's no tree branches, making sure there's no power lines, and look up and live is the phrase. And, another piece of safety advice I'd impart, if for some reason the vehicle you're in does become energized, say a line falls on you or you get a mast into power lines somehow, don't get out of it. Unless it's on fire or emergency crews are there to help you, stay put. You're going to be more safe inside of it than you are if you try to get out, because if you become that path to ground, the electricity goes out in decreasing voltages, concentric rings around the vehicle. And if you connect two of those voltages, it's going to be lethal for you. So if you do have to get out, bunny hop or shuffle your feet, and otherwise just wait for them to come and de-energize the line. And again, the phrase, look up and live. I just want every ham to take that to heart.
Sierra, thank you. Great having you with us. And there is a great article about ham safety in this week's ARRL letter, but you can find that at arrl.org.
Sierra went on to say that Look Up and Live was drilled into me and every other television news employee who worked with electronic news gathering vehicles that had a pneumatic mast or satellite dish. It was the title of an industry standard safety video published by the National Press Photographers Association. In pursuit of our amateur radio hobby, we should apply even more diligence. There's no pressure to get on for a ham radio activation. Take your time, walk around, and be diligent. Look up and live. Portable masts, vertical antennas, wire antennas slung up into a tree, anything you put up can become energized if it contacts an overhead wire. Do not take chances. Even what appears to be a phone or fiber line could be carrying lethal voltages. Do not become the path to ground. Please be careful when erecting portable gear within the wire's environment. Remember, look up and live. We thank the ARRL and Sierra Harrop W5DX for use of this report.
Volunteer amateur radio operators serving in the ARRL, the National Association for Amateur Radio, and the Amateur Radio Emergency Service, or ARES, are embedded with local served agencies in the areas of Central Texas affected by devastating floods. With more details on the important communications that amateurs are providing, we go to League headquarters where John Ross, KD8IDJ, files this special report.
The needs and assignments have been changing, but ARES volunteers are stepping up to meet the dynamic needs of their communities. This is a very fluid situation. It changes by the hour, said ARRL South Texas District 7 Emergency Coordinator Terry Jones, K5LGV. The trained ham radio operators were activated starting on Friday, July 4th, 2025. Radio amateurs are providing communications capabilities to agencies whose primary systems were damaged in a flooding event or where they suffer poor connectivity due to the terrain. ARES members helped the American Red Cross with a setup of a reunification shelter in response to the floods. 10 hams were assigned to search and rescue teams. Dozens of health and welfare messages were passed by ham radio operators who provided a critical link when phone lines were overwhelmed. A lot of this is tied to circuit overload, preventing folks from making direct contact with family members in the area, said Kevin McCoy, KF5FUZ. During the flooding event and subsequent search and rescue missions, ARES members have been deployed to serve many different counties, including hard-hit Kerr and Kendall counties. Mutual aid has been offered between several surrounding ARRL sections. We'll have more updated information as it comes in on these Texas floods. I'm John Ross, KD8IDJ.
The Amateur Radio Emergency Service consists of licensed amateurs who have voluntarily registered their qualifications and equipment with their local area's leadership for communications duty in the public service when disaster strikes. Amateur radio operators use their training, skills, and equipment to provide communications during emergencies when all else fails. Hams serve their communities when storms or other disasters damage critical communication infrastructure, including cell towers and wired and wireless networks. Amateur radio can function completely independently of the internet and phone systems. An amateur radio station can be set up almost anywhere in minutes. Hams can quickly raise a wire antenna in a tree or on a mast, connect it to a radio and power source, and communicate effectively with others.
The amateur radio map of Canada has undergone a change with the creation of a new section. Radio amateurs who live in Canada's Yukon Territory now have a section to call their own. Radio Amateurs of Canada has separated the Yukon Territory from the overall territory section and given it a designation of its own. It now carries the abbreviation Yankee Uniform Kilo, setting it apart from hams in Nunavut and the Northwest Territories. Those regions continue to be part of a section known as Territories, which carries the abbreviation Tango Echo Romeo. Radio Amateurs of Canada made the announcement in the July-August issue of the journal called The Canadian Amateur. The change took effect on the 1st of July. While the new section may have consequences for ARRL Field Day, sweepstakes, CW, sweepstakes single sideband, and the 160-meter contest, the changes are not expected to have an impact on any major contest from the ARRL or the RAC. Organizers of QSO parties may need to review their operating rules.
You are listening to North America's premier news and information service for the amateur radio hobbyist. We are This Week in Amateur Radio.
Hello and welcome to the DX Corner for your weekly dose of DX as part of Ham Radio's oldest ham radio magazine on the air, This Week in Amateur Radio. I'm Bill, AJB. If you're watching this on YouTube, the text of this will be included in the show notes. You won't have to remember dates, details, calls, URLs, or other items. You can just check the show notes. As of this Saturday, there will be 161 days until Christmas. Time is flying, so we better get started. I received an email asking about the word of the week. 3 years ago, when I was honored to have been asked to join this podcast, I started with the DX word of the week, and I did that for quite a while. The email asked that I return to doing that, and I will. Thanks, Bob, K8CAA, for sending that email to me. It's really an excellent suggestion. So, the DX word for this week is band slots. DXers are heard to use this term frequently, and it certainly is helpful to know what they're referring to. The term band slot is used to indicate how frequently a ham has confirmed a particular entity. Not how many times they have worked it, but how many bands they have confirmed it. For instance, you might have confirmed Romania Y0 once on 20 meters. That would be one band slot for Romania. However, over time, you may also confirm Romania on 10, 15, 17, and 40 meters. This would be 4 new band slots for Romania, or a total of 5. Many hams use a chart or their logging program to indicate whether they need a particular entity on a particular band. In this case, the next time Romania is available on 12 or 160 meters, I will get notified that Romania is available on that band at that time. Totaling all your band slots gives an indication of how much DX an operator has worked. I would say that 1,500 to 2,000 is typical, while 3,000 plus is very rare air indeed. Each week, I will try to focus on those entities that will be available in the next 7 days. There's so much data to sift through that I thought a focus on the next week might be helpful. Here's what you should find QRV when you tune the bands. The following is DX information comes from Bernie, W3UR, editor of the Daily DX, the Weekly DX, and the House DX column in QST. If you would like a free 2-week trial of the Daily DX, your only source of real-time DX information, just drop me a note at thedxmentor@gmail.com. The Dave Coulter Memorial Youth DX Adventure announces that they plan to participate in a DX adventure to Curacao, operating as Papa Julia to Yankee until July 22nd. Quote, the Caribbean Contesting Consortium, PJ2T, Super Contest Station is hosting us for the 4th time. We look forward to seeing our host and friend Uli Tilke, Delta Lima 8, Oscar Bravo, Quebec. This time we'll be operating as the DX and as a special event station. Operations by the Young Ops will be about 4 days and sometimes around the clock. We anticipate several thousand QSOs on most bands. This trip is sponsored by the Dayton Amateur Radio Association, DX Engineering, the QCWW Foundation, along with several other clubs and individuals, end quote. So good luck to those guys. Rafael, November 3 Radio Papa, using his Yankee November 2 Radio Papa call sign from Nicaragua, says that he will, quote, be calling CQDX vacation style, end quote, again this summer until August 4th, and that he hopes to work as many of you as possible. Andre, HB9HLM, is QRV casually as Charlie November 2 November Echo from Morocco until July 22nd on 40 through 6 meters. He's not planning any paper QSLs, so you have to go through EQSL or QRZ for details. Vlad, OK2WX, has the Juliet Whiskey Zero Victor call sign until July 23rd from Longyearbyen, Svalbard. He's using CW, sideband, and FT8 on 80 through 10 meters. And you can QSL Vlad, his JW0 Victor call sign, direct to I8K8C and LOTW. TY5FR is QRV from Benin until August the 6th, with red DL1BUG operating. He plans CW and sideband on 80 through 10 meters. And you can QSL that to Delta Lima 1 BUG or go through club log OQRS or LOTW. Larry, KI6LT, is QRV in his spare time from KI6LT stroke Zulu Delta 8 until July 22nd from Ascension Island. He has an FT710 and an end-fed 40-meter wire. Activity is mostly single sideband. He will also have a whisper signal on 40, 20, 15, and 10 meters. The most likely time to catch him on the air will be from July 18th to the 21st, so about the time you're listening to this. T30 Tango 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 is QRV from Kiribati on a work detail for about 3 months. This is not a 24/7 expedition. Activity from T30 will be between work and meetings. All small pistols, which is their priority, will have enough time to work them on all bands if propagation allows. And they've been all over the place, and they're really excellent operators. So if you need them, go get them. Michael VE2XB is now QRV from Iceland, is Tango Fox stroke VE2XB until July 25th. He'll be operating on 80 through 10 meters, and you can QSL that to VE2XB. Adrian, Golf Zero Kilo Oscar Mike, is QRV from Zulu Charlie 4 Mike Kilo on the UK Sovereign Base area on Cyprus during July. And you can QSL that via OQRS, LOTW, or the home call. If you're interested in DX podcasts and YouTube channels, you should check out the DX Mentor Facebook page, which is literally on Facebook, the DX Mentor. Subscribe to be kept up to date on all the DX activities going on. And there's a lot of state QSO parties and DX conventions coming up that we'll be mentioning, so you may not want to miss that. So from our contest update section, we have this. I know that the ARL contest sheet is read elsewhere in this podcast, and the contests that I mention are sometimes redundant. However, there are a few contests that I have found to be especially useful for DXers who are trying to fill band slots. So the first one I want to look at 2 weeks from now is the RSGB, the Radio Society of Great Britain IOTA, or Islands on the Air contest. Quote, a major contest in July is the Radio Society of Great Britain Islands on the Air contest, July 26th from 1200 Zulu to July 27th at 1200 Zulu. This was created in 1993, and this event now attracts thousands of participants, both Islands activators and chasers. Full details, including the official rules, are on the RSGB website. Known activations appear in this and past issues of the Weekly DX as well, and on the NG3K website. And I would recommend that you check this out. There's been a few islands that I've worked only during this contest. So it's a great time, again, to fill band slots or potentially work an all-time new one. And if you do participate, let me know how you do. Please send me an email if you need details on this topic or anything else that I mentioned. Until next week, this is Bill, AJ8B, saying 7-3, and thanks to my XYL Karen for her love and support. I hope to hear you in the pileups. Have a great DX week.
A new study has revealed that the May 2024 Gannon solar storm caused GPS signals to be off by up to 70 meters, severely impacting farmers who lost over $500 million due to manufacturing GPS-guided machinery during peak planting season. The storm, the most powerful in 20 years, created widespread ionospheric turbulence that distorted GPS signals for up to 2 days and produced stunning auroras visible to USA observers as far south as Mexico and Spain. Boston University researchers used a network of fixed GPS receivers originally intended for tectonic studies to measure the disturbances, uncovering a massive wall of ionospheric plasma that threw off positioning data across North America. This GPS disruption affected not only agriculture, but also aviation, exceeding the safety margin for altitude precision during landings. Experts warn that this storm was mild compared to a potential Carrington-level event, which could cause even more severe global consequences. Scientists suggest that real-time ionospheric monitoring and AI-based signal correction could help mitigate such risks in the future.
The numbers for 2025 ARRL Field Day are impressive. ARRL Contest Program Manager Paul Bork, N1SFE, shared the latest update. Entries by class for Class A, 777. Class B 595, Class C 38, Class D 1,462, Class E 576, and Class F 112 for total entries of 3,560. And total QSOs by all modes, 861,397. Remember, the deadline for entries is July 29th, and you can read more about the 2025 ARRL Field Day at arrl.org.
Are you ready for another excursion into amateur radio history? This is Bill Continelli, W2XOY, and I'll be back in a moment with another installment of the Ancient Amateur Archives.
You are listening to This Week in Amateur Radio, available as an on-demand stream from Spotify, Deezer, and wherever podcasts are available.
Picture the following scenario in a slightly grainy black and white for added effect. It's the 1950s. A ham is sitting at his station, having a CW QSO. He's wearing a suit and tie. Before him is a Hammerlin receiver, a Johnson Viking transmitter, and a homebrew modulator. On the wall are QSL cards and his honorable discharge certificate. On the table is a collection of QST magazines, along with some curious pamphlets with titles such as Protect Them, Join Civil Defense, America Calling, Take Your Place in Civil Defense, It Can Happen Here, Know the Signals, and even a comic book featuring a character called Bert the Turtle. While the vibroplex clicks away, another radio sits in the background, quietly spitting out atmospheric noise. It's an AM broadcast receiver, one of those 5-tube AC/DC models produced by the millions. This unit, an Arvin in an Art Deco plastic cabinet, is tuned to one of two triangular markings on the dial. Suddenly the silence is shattered by a piercing 1,000-cycle tone. The ham looks up, rips off his headphones, and listens to a message. He jumps from the chair, runs to the door, and yells to his wife, "Grab the kids and go down to the fallout shelter. The Conelrad alarm just went off." Conelrad, which stood for Control of Electromagnetic Radiations, had its embryonic start in December 1951 when President Harry Truman signed an executive order directing the FCC to set up a security system for all civilian radio services. Throughout 1952, Conelrad was developed and tested, and by early 1953 it was ready. The purpose of Conelrad was to relay civil defense information to the public without allowing enemy aircraft to use our radio signals as a beacon for their direction-finding equipment. In the event of an emergency, all FM, TV, and most AM stations would proceed with the following alarm sequence. First, current programming would be discontinued. Then, 5 seconds, the carrier was off the air, followed by 5 seconds, an unmodulated carrier. Then, 5 seconds, carrier off the air, followed by 15 seconds of a 1,000-cycle modulated carrier, then a 1-minute maximum initial Conelrad message, and finally, the carrier off the air for the duration of the alert. The remaining AM stations would shift to either 640 or 1240 kilocycles and simultaneously broadcast a more detailed emergency message. The stations would constantly turn their carriers on and off. For example, Station A, operating on 640 kilocycles, would broadcast the emergency message for 15 seconds and suddenly cut its carrier. The public would then hear Station B, also on 640 kilocycles, with the same message. When Station B went silent, Station C would appear and, after a few seconds, Station A would be back on the air. This cluster pattern would continue until the emergency message had been broadcast. The same activity would be happening on 1240 kilocycles. No call signs or other ID would be given. In this way, the FCC and the Office of Civil Defense hope to confuse enemy aircraft trying to use AM radio stations as a homing beacon. The ARRL and the FCC realized that amateur stations might also serve as a beacon. Therefore, from the beginning, amateurs were urged to keep watch on 640 or 1240 kilocycles and to kill their transmitters when the alarm was given. With the importance of CONELRAD in the early 1950s, it's surprising that amateurs were not required to monitor for the CONELRAD alarm. This was rectified on January 2, 1957, when the FCC amended Part 12 of the Rules and Regulations to require the following. All operators of stations in the amateur radio service will be responsible for the reception of the CONELRAD radio alert by monitoring 640 or 1240 kilocycles. During a CONELRAD radio alert, all operators of amateur radio stations will cease communications immediately. Stations operating under the Radio Amateur Civil Emergency Service, RACES, and other stations specifically authorized would be allowed to remain on the air under the following conditions. No transmission would be made unless it is of extreme emergency affecting the national safety or the safety of life and property. Transmissions would be as short as possible. No station identification or location would be given. Tactical calls would be utilized if necessary. And the radio station carrier would be discontinued during periods of no message transmission. Amateur stations were not allowed back on the air until the CONELRAD radio all-clear message was transmitted. With the requirement of continuous broadcast band monitoring, homebrew projects, kits, and commercial products began to appear to help the amateur keep in compliance with Part 12-190. While some amateurs simply used a simple AM radio, others bought or built specific CONELRAD receivers. Heathkit had the CA-1 CONELRAD alarm. Morrow Radio had the CM1 CONELRAD monitor, and the Walter Ash Radio Company had the model CA CONELARM. Radio Shack's first transistor radio, which sold for a mere $29.95 and $1958, was advertised as perfect for monitoring CONELRAD. When Class D CB radio was authorized in September of 1958, the rules specified that CBers also had to monitor CONELRAD. In the event of an emergency, all citizen band operators had to leave the air. There were no RACES provisions for them. By the early 1960s, the possibility of long-range enemy bombers homing in on our radio signals was becoming remote. Instead, intercontinental ballistic missiles were the new threat. They didn't require our broadcast signals as beacons. CONELRAD was becoming obsolete. Thus, in the autumn of 1962, CONELRAD was replaced by the Emergency Broadcast System. Ironically, CONELRAD disappeared right around the time it might have been needed the most, the Cuban Missile Crisis. As the 1960s wore on, the Cold War gradually disappeared and the specter of imminent enemy attack disappeared. Today, only the faded fallout shelter signs and those triangular markings on old AM radios remain to remind us of CONELRAD and the Cold War. As I write this, I can hear a Springfield, Massachusetts station on 640 kilohertz, while a heterodyne of Class 4 stations commingles on 1240. And yet, what is that I hear faintly in the background? A 1,000 cycle tone? This is Bill Continelli, W2XOY, for This Week in Amateur Radio.
It's always a bit of a homecoming every year when the young participants in the Dave Coulter Memorial Youth DX Adventure arrive in Caraco at the Super Contest Station of the Caribbean Contesting Consortium. From the 17th to the 22nd of July, the adventurer's host, Yuli, Delta Lima 8, Oscar Bravo, Quebec, will be extending a welcome to Oklahoma brothers Izzy Russell, Kilo Juliet 5, Charlie Mike Papa, and Hosea, Whiskey Delta 5, Juliet Romeo, and their father, John, November 5, Victory Oscar Foxtrot. Agnes Wagner, Alpha Delta 8, India Romeo, and her brother Ben, Alpha Delta 8, Foxtrot, Quebec, are accompanied by their grandmother, Joanne, a fan of CW, even though she is not a licensed amateur operator herself. As in previous years, the group's log is destined to fill up with several thousand QSOs as the young operators call QRZ under the call sign Papa Juliet 2 Yankee from the island that is islands on the air number SA-099. The adventure opportunity, which is open to licensed amateurs between the ages of 12 and 17, bears the name of its co-founder, Dave Coulter, Kilo Bravo 8, Oscar Charlie Papa, who became a silent key in 2013.
You are listening to This Week in Amateur Radio. Available worldwide as a podcast from our web at twiar.net.
Foundations of Amateur Radio. Recently, I was given some radio data captured on the 40-meter band. Using a piece of software called Universal Radio Hacker, I attempted to decode it. At the time, I thought that this might be Morse code. Since then, I've been told by someone who has been using Morse longer than I've been alive that it isn't. I shared the data on my VK6FLAB GitHub repository where you can download it and see what you learn, and perhaps repeat what I did, or better still, improve on it. Over the years, I've talked a little about how software-defined radio, or SDR, works. Essentially, it's a glorified analog-to-digital converter, much like the sound card in your computer, which does the same, albeit at a much lower frequency. As it happens, you can represent the signal that comes into your radio antenna as a series of values. Essentially, the stronger the signal, the bigger the number. The weaker the signal, the lower the number. Let's talk about the characteristics of this signal. It consists of two parallel signals, in opposition to each other. The first signal jumps intermittently between 7 kHz and 40 kHz, where the second jumps between -7 kHz and -40 kHz. The recording is marked 7.0 MHz, so if we think of that as the central frequency, the whole signal sits between 7.02 and 7.1 MHz. This 80 kHz wide signal is not something you'd typically be able to hear using a standard amateur radio receiver, which tops out at about 3 kHz bandwidth. It's so wide that you couldn't even hear more than one of the 4 tones at the same time. Randall, Victor Kilo 6 Whiskey Romeo, who supplied the recording, spotted it on a waterfall display showing a chunk of radio spectrum. In fact, a $25 RTL SDR dongle could receive this signal. Aside from the fact that this is a really wide signal, well, at least in traditional amateur radio terms, it was interesting in that it was heard on the 40-meter band. As it happens, just after I shared my initial exploration, I was told by several other amateurs that they had heard the signal. I even saw it on a web SDR in India and attempted to record it, but failed. As it happens, a few weeks ago I was playing with something called CAN bus, or Controller Area Network, a technology that was designed in 1983 and is used all over cars for things like sensors for speed, engine temperature, oxygen level, detonation timing, and anything else that's happening inside a car. You might know the end-user view of this called OBD2, or Onboard Diagnostics Second Generation. I was looking into it because my car has been acting up and I've been trying to track down the root cause. Anyway, I learned that CAN bus is implemented using something neat: differential signaling, where 2 wires each carry the same but opposite signal, so they can be combined to ensure that in an electrically noisy environment like a car, the information still gets where it needs to go. Seeing the radio signal Randall shared reminded me of this. Noise immunity is a useful attribute in digital HF communication, so I can understand why it was done like this, but it also means that either signal was sufficient to start to decode the information. We can use Universal Radio Hacker to show us only half the signal using a band pass filter. I then decided that the 40 kHz frequency was on and represented by a 1, and the 7 kHz frequency was off, represented by a 0. Of course, that's entirely arbitrary. There's no reason that it cannot be the other way around, but for our purposes it doesn't matter at this time. That said, we don't yet have enough to decode the actual signal. We need to figure out how long each switch, or bit, lasts, because 2 zeros side by side or 2 ones side by side would look like a long off or a long on. Using that logic, you could also say that the shortest possible duration for a 40 kHz or a 7 kHz tone would represent a single 1 or a single 0. Of course, this is a simplified view of the world. For example, the data file contains more than 13.5 million bytes. Half of those are for the I in IQ, the other for the Q. I'm purposefully glossing over a bunch of stuff here, specifically the notion of so-called IQ signals. That's for another time. In computing, a single byte can represent 256 different values. It means that if the signal is represented by a single byte, a voltage from the antenna at maximum amplitude can be represented as 255, and the minimum amplitude as 0. As it happens, voltages go up and down around 0, so now we're only using half a byte, 127 for maximum, minus 128 for minimum. If we use 2 bytes, we get significantly more resolution. Minus 32,768 as the minimum, and 32,767 as the max. A little trial and error using another tool, in Spectrum, told me that the data was organized as 2 bytes per sample, which brings the next point. How many samples per signal? Said differently, we're measuring the antenna voltage several times per second, let's say twice per second. If a tone of 7 kHz lasts a second, then we get 2 samples showing 7 kHz. If it lasts half a second, we only get 1. As it happens, we are measuring over 22,000 times per second, and using the cursor feature on Universal Radio Hacker, we can determine that each signal lasts 2,500 samples. It's roughly a rate of 100 bits per second. The In-Spectrum tool puts it at 91.81 baud. It's not a standard baud rate, sitting between 75 and 110 baud. Using Universal Radio Hacker, I was able to decode 1,416 bits. You'll find them on my GitHub page next to the signal. Now for the fun. What does it mean? I started with looking for structure by looking for zeros. In short order, I discovered several sequences of 0. Then I noticed that there appeared to be a repeating pattern. After some trial and error using the grep and fold commands on my Linux terminal, I discovered that the pattern repeats, more or less, every 255 bits. I say more or less because there are a few bits that are not the same. I suspect that this is a decoding error, which could potentially have been eliminated by using the noise immunity features associated with the differential signaling, but I don't yet know how to do that. Here's what I think I'm looking at. It appears to be a signal that's a unique identifier, specifically so that it can be used to synchronize 2 things together. In this case, I suspect that it's an over-the-horizon radar, and the sequence is used to synchronize the transmitter and the receiver. I think that the signal strength variations are what allows reflections to be measured, and I suspect that the actual transmitter and receiver are using more than 2 bytes to represent each sample, but I'm speculating. If you have an alternative explanation, I'm all ears. I'm Ono, Victor Kilo 6 Foxtrot Lima Alpha Bravo.
We pause for stations along the network to identify. We are This Week in Amateur Radio, available as a stream to your favorite digital device on Spotify, TuneIn.com, Overcast, iHeartMedia, and wherever you download your podcasts.
Bruce Page, KK5DO, is here now with this week's AMSAT report. Bruce?
Thanks, John. AMSAT is currently working on many different projects. We have the Golf program, which currently consists of Golf T and Golf 1. As Golf T is being designed around a 3U CubeSat, it will have a greater power budget and more experiments. One of the newest features is the SDR, or software-defined radio. This will allow changing modes from QSOs to digital or SSTV. There will be the capability of using 5 GHz or C-band and 10 GHz or X-band, which would be called 5 and dime. The Golf T will also have UHF and VHF. This will allow those with current stations to still make QSOs and upgrade their stations for 5 and dime. Golf 1 will follow Golf T with lessons learned and additions. Another project is PackSats. More about this later. This is Bruce Page, KK5DO. Back to you, John.
And thanks, Bruce, for that report.
It is time for the weekly look at solar weather and the propagation forecast. Solar activity has been at low levels this past week. The largest flare of the period was July 16th from region 4143. Continued influence from the coronal hole high-speed stream will maintain higher than normal electron flux at geostationary orbit through July 18th. The greater than 2 MeV flux will be moderate to high, especially during the diurnal maxima, or pressure oscillation, occurring during this time. Solar wind parameters continued to be enhanced under positive polarity coronal hole high-speed stream influence. This is expected to continue through July 19th. For more information concerning radio propagation, visit the ARRL Technical Information Service, read a quick guide to HF propagation using solar indices, and check out the propagation page of Karl Lewetzelschwab, K9LA. For customizable propagation charts, visit the vocap online for ham radio website.
Just ahead in radio sport this week, July 19th, the Yoda contest, that's CW and phone. July 19th as well, the Trans-Tasman Low Bands Challenge, CW phone and digital. July 19th and 20th, it's the Libraire DX contest, CW and phone. July 19th and 20th as well, the CQ Worldwide VHF Digital Contest, that is digital. And also on July 19th to the 20th, it's the North American QSO Party, RIDDI, that is digital. Remember to search the ARRL Hamfest and Convention database to find more events in your area. Upcoming section, state, and division conventions on July 26th, the ARRL West Virginia State Convention and Hamfest, that's in Sutton, West Virginia. August 2nd, the ARRL Maine State Convention and Hamfest, Augusta, Maine. And on August 3rd, the SVARC Berryville Hamfest, hosting the ARRL Roanoke Division Convention, that's in Berryville, Virginia.
Much of the Federal Communication Commission's pirate radio enforcement may be focused on the East Coast, but that doesn't mean field agents aren't at work hunting down unlicensed operators coast to coast and in small-town America. Case in point, the Enforcement Bureau has released a notice of pirate broadcasting to a Sweet Home, Oregon property owner. The FCC says in April its agents tracked an unlicensed station operating on 92.1 FM to a property on Nandina Street in Sweet Home, a Linn County, Oregon community with a population of 9,828 that is often referred to as a gateway to the Cascade Mountains. The FCC is giving owner Sam Marshall 10 business days to identify the individual engaged in the pirate radio broadcasting on their property, as well as evidence that they are no longer to be on the air from his property. Similar letters sent to landlords in previous situations, the Enforcement Bureau says even if the building owners turn over the information, there is no guarantee they will not face fines themselves. If you do not respond to this notice, the FCC may nonetheless determine that, as a legal matter, you have sufficient knowledge of the above-referenced pirate radio activity to support enforcement action against you, the letter from Region 3 Director Lark Hadley says. Under federal law, the FCC may fine someone who continues to permit any individual or entity to engage in pirate radio broadcasting from any property they own or manage. This year, the inflation-adjusted maximum penalties for pirate broadcasting have increased to $122,661 per day, with a maximum of $2,453,218. more than the $2,391,097 maximum penalty a year ago due to annual inflation adjustments. Since January 2020, the FCC has taken 7 pirate-related enforcement actions in Oregon. That makes it the 7th biggest state for unlicensed radio according to the FCC's pirate radio database.
FCC Chairman Brendan Carr has announced a sweeping review of the emergency alert system as part of his Build America agenda, signaling potentially the most significant changes to emergency communications infrastructure in the U.S. in more than 3 decades. Carr previewed the coming attractions in a blog post published Wednesday, saying the FCC will vote to launch a comprehensive re-examination of both the emergency alert system at the Commission's upcoming August open meeting, which sends alerts via TV and radio, and the wireless emergency alert platform to be used on mobile devices. With underlying frameworks that are 31 years old for EAS and 13 years old for wireless platforms, we think it's time to explore if structural changes to the system are needed, with an eye towards making sure we're leveraging the latest technology to save lives, said Carr. The announcement follows the historic flooding in the Texas Hill Country earlier this month, claimed more than 120 lives. Carr emphasized the FCC's role in ensuring reliable communications during crisis, referencing a recent commissioned roundtable on network resiliency that featured representatives from emergency service, telecommunications, and energy providers. Carr's announcement likely comes as welcome news to the National Association of Broadcasters, which has been continuing its campaign for the allowance of software-based emergency alert system encoders. The EAS reforms are part of a broader summer regulatory surge at the FCC under Carr's leadership. Other upcoming initiatives include streamlining disaster data reporting through reforms to the Disaster Information Reporting System, removing outdated technical mandates for radio stations, and other initiatives under the delete mandate. The upcoming August 7th meeting will come just 2 weeks after the July 24th open meeting, which is expected to address more telecommunications-related issues.
The Ham Radio Science Citizen Investigation, or HAMSCI, is preparing for a series of upcoming meteor scatter experiments. John Ross, KD8IDJ, is here with all the details on this special operating event.
Operation will take place during 2 well-known meteor showers, Perseids on August 11th and 12th, and Geminids on August 12th and 13th. This is a combination special event and contest to generate contact during meteor scatter events using the 6 and 10 meter bands. 10 meters has been used infrequently for meteor scatter study due to past symbol rate limits. However, with recent changes in the FCC rules, WSJT-X/MSK144 protocols may now be used on HF bands. Operators are needed now to be active on the MSK144 or passive if possible, reporting via PSK Reporter as monitors. The best times are early morning hours prior to 10 meters opening to F2 propagation. Meteor scatter propagation occurs well below F2 and is supported in or near the E layer, where the meteor ionization tracks occur. Saturday mornings are being used regularly to announce and coordinate 10-meter contacts using Ping Jockey Central. Announcements are also made on the Front Range 6-meter group's I.O. due to the substantial number of meteor scour operators in that group. To be successful, both active and passive operators are needed. The upcoming August meteor shower is an excellent time to set up your equipment and join with other operators preparing for the event. At a later date, the HAMSCI team will be collecting operator contact information. Contest rules can be found at www.hamsci.org/MSQP, and a description of the HAMSCI Meteor Shower QSO Party 2025 can be found at that same location. I'm John Ross, KD8IDJ.
Data will be collected from both bands during the scheduled times in August and December and will be analyzed offline using both PSK Reporter raw data and operator contact logs from WSJT-X. User data, including both logged contact and received reports, are necessary for valid experimental analysis. The latter can be provided by any received system reporting on MSK144 through PSK Reporter. HAMSCI serves as a means for fostering collaboration between professional researchers and amateur radio operators. For more information about HAMSCI and to join the mailing list, visit www.ham.sci.org.
You're listening to North America's premier amateur radio and technology news magazine of the air. We are This Week in Amateur Radio, distributed worldwide at twiar.net.
Dr. Carol Malazzo, MD, KP4MD of Citrus Heights, California, has been appointed Vice Director of the ARRL Pacific Division effective July 9, 2025. She replaces John Litz, NZ6Q, who was seated to the position of Director in May. She will serve the remainder of a 3-year term ending December 31, 2025. Since 2015, Dr. Malazzo has served as Section Manager of the ARRL Sacramento Valley Section. She is volunteer examiner and an ARRL Life member. The ARRL Pacific Division comprises the ARRL sections of East Bay, Sacramento Valley, San Francisco, San Joaquin Valley, Santa Clara Valley, Nevada, and Pacific. Meanwhile, these changes have taken place in the ARRL Atlantic Division. Martin Marty Newingham, AG3I of Greensburg, Pennsylvania, has been appointed Vice Director of the ARRL Atlantic Division effective July 15, 2025. Newingham will serve the remainder of a term that expires December 31, 2026. He replaces Martin J. Pittenger, KB3MXM, who resigned from the position in April. The ARRL Atlantic Division comprises the ARRL sections of Delaware, Eastern Pennsylvania, Maryland, D.C., Northern New York, Southern New Jersey, Western New York, and Western Pennsylvania. And finally, these changes were announced in the ARRL Sacramento Valley section. Jay Ballinger, N6SAC of Antelope, California, has been appointed Section Manager of the ARRL Sacramento Valley section effective July 16, 2025. He will serve the remainder of a term that expires on September 30, 2027. He replaces Dr. Carol Malazzo, MD, KP4MD, who was appointed as Pacific Division Vice Director. The ARRL Field Organization is the grassroots core that makes up 60,000 volunteers among ARRL membership. It is divided into 71 sections, each of which is led by a volunteer section manager who is nominated and voted on by the members of the section. Section managers serve 2-year terms. ARRL, the National Association of Amateur Radio, is governed by an all-volunteer board of directors. The elections are held for 5 of the 15 ARRL divisions each year for terms of 3 years.
The amateur radio on the International Space Station program is seeking formal and informal education institutions and organizations, individually or working together, to host an amateur radio contact with a crew member on board the space station. ARIS anticipates the contact will be held between January 1 of 2026 and June 30 of 2026. Crew scheduling and ISS orbits will determine the exact contact date. To maximize these large contact opportunities, ARIS is looking for organizations that will draw large numbers of participants and integrate the contact into a well-developed educational plan. Crew members aboard the International Space Station will participate in scheduled amateur radio contacts. These radio contacts will be approximately 10 minutes in length and allow students to interact with the astronauts through a question and answer session. The deadline to submit a proposal is August 29 of 2025. Proposal information and more details, such as expectations, proposal guidelines, and the proposal form can be found at www.ariss.org. An ARIS introductory webinar session will be held on Zoom on July 30 at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. Questions should be directed to education@ariss-usa.org.
The National Voice of America Museum of Broadcasting has been around for more than 20 years, but a project supported by a $500,000 grant has transformed its World War II vintage building, the former VOA Bethany Relay Station transmitting plant, into a world-class repository of communications history and knowledge. The 30,000 square foot, two-story building was deeded over to the township of Westchester, Ohio, following the VOA's closing of the station in 1994. Little of it would be recognizable to those present when the transmissions began in late 1943. The facility was constructed by the Crosley Broadcasting Corporation under a contract from the Office of War Information as part of the initial VOA initiative to disseminate accurate reporting of wartime news to Axis nations. It had languished and fallen into disrepair following its abandonment by the VOA. The infusion of funding now allows artifacts to be better displayed, as well as making the facility more accessible and comfortable for visitors. The largest item on display is a 1960s vintage 250,000-watt 821A Collins shortwave transmitter that was abandoned in place when the GSA ceded building and grounds ownership to the local government. The giant transmitter has been extensively labeled to allow visitors to better understand what they are viewing. And while the government did remove the antennas en masse, museum volunteers have constructed scale models to illustrate how the site once appeared. The facility is anchored by VOA artifacts and exhibits, but Jay Adrick, president of the museum board, is quick to remind visitors that from the 1920s onward, Cincinnati, just south of the Bethany site, was a broadcast industry hub. This heritage is reflected in exhibits. In addition to Crosley's massive manufacturing and broadcasting operation, Cincinnati was home to the Codell Radio Corporation, the original owner of station WKRC, said Edrick. Other radio receiving and equipment manufacturers calling Cincinnati home included the Midwest Radio Corporation, which sold their products directly to consumers. There were about 40 radio and radio parts manufacturers in the Cincinnati area, added Lee Hitt, a museum curator and docent. This was the Silicon Valley of its day. It was the center of broadcasting, the center of radio, and the center of the technology at the time. Crosley's flagship, WLW, once had the distinction of being the most powerful radio station in the country, operating with 500,000 watts during the 1930s, and referring to itself as the nation's station. To provide programming, Crosley amassed an impressive group of entertainers and personalities, many of whom would become nationally famous. Museum visitors have the opportunity to experience some of this broadcasting history through exhibits featuring profiles of several of the on-air performers. While the 1/4 megawatt Collins rig is the largest such item in the collection, it is by no means the only transmitter. Volunteers have restored to like-new condition an early 70-kilowatt shortwave transmitter built and used by Crosley. Other artifacts included a massive 100-kilowatt water-cooled triode, one of 22 used to power the WLW 500-kilowatt rig. The museum will continue to be a place where the voice of America is celebrated as one of the most effective uses of broadcasting.
Amateur radio on the International Space Station has announced slow scan television Series 28 to run from July 14th through July 20th, 2025. The theme will be the Apollo-Soyuz mission and the STS-51F, which pioneered slow scan television on shuttles. This series of 12 images will be transmitted from the ISS on 145.800 MHz using PD-120 encoding. Software needed to decode the pictures is free and available for PCs, Macs, Android smartphones, and iPhones. Search SSTV software on Google and your phone's App Store for a variety of options. Transmissions from the ISS are powerful enough so images can be received with a handheld radio and its stock rubber duck antenna, albeit quite noisy. The addition of a simple homemade 3-element beam to the handheld can produce pixel-perfect images. You are invited to upload decoded images in the ARIS gallery area ARIS, Series 28, Apollo-Soyuz, and STS-51F at aris-usa.org/ARIS_SSTV. Once you've submitted your pictures, just click on the dedicated button to apply for the official ARIS SSTV award. Transmissions began on Monday, July 14th at 9:15 UTC. Transmissions will cease on Sunday, July 20th at 1800 UTC.
You are listening to This Week in Amateur Radio, available to download as a podcast from anywhere on the web podcasts are available.
A long-time unlicensed radio operator in Massachusetts has agreed to a consent decree with the FCC, resulting in a reduced civil penalty. John Marius was issued a forfeiture of approximately $600,000 in April of 2024 for operating Radio Teleplanet Compass, which was heard in Brockton, Randolph, and the Boston area. It broadcast on 89.3 FM and more recently 105.3 with Haitian language religious programming. After receiving the notice of apparent liability, the commission said Marius sought reconsideration based on his inability to pay. The Enforcement Bureau reviewed his financial status and, through a Boston field office agent, confirmed he was no longer operating the unlicensed station. As a result, it proceeded with a consent decree which resolved the outstanding notice. Marius must pay a civil penalty of $10,000 to the U.S. Department of Treasury within 30 days. It requires him not to commit any further acts constituting pirate radio broadcasting within 20 years, or else face a penalty of approximately $600,000. The Radio Teleplanet Compass website notes that this year is the operation's 23rd anniversary. Marius' history with the FCC goes back to the year 2004, when agents from its Boston field office traced the source of an 89.3 FM unlicensed transmission back to his house in Randolph, Mass. According to the commission's account, he admitted to agents he was the owner and the operator of the equipment in question. Marius received verbal and written warnings to cease operation of the station, but, according to the commission, had failed to do so. His first issued a notice of apparent liability for the broadcast in November of 2005. The commission also filed a notice of unlicensed operation against him in 2017, which it said he signed and accepted. Agents detected transmissions in Brockton and Mattapan, traced to the Radio Teleplanet Compass in 2023, which resulted in the apparent recent notice. The operation now appears to be streaming only, according to the station's website.
A Miami area pirate radio operator is pushing back against a $2.39 million FCC fine, claiming the agency's penalty is unconstitutional and pointing to a blockbuster Supreme Court ruling that would scuttle how the FCC punishes unlicensed broadcasters. Fabrice Polinis, who FCC Enforcement Bureau agents found to be operating the unlicensed station Radio Touche Douce from February to March 2023, argues that the penalty violates his constitutional right to a jury trial under the Seventh Amendment in a new filing, referencing recent court rulings that limit federal agencies' authority to impose civil fines without judicial oversight. Polinis has a history of additional pirate broadcasting dating back to at least 2012, per the Commission. In his appeal, Polinis argues that the FCC's forfeiture process violates constitutional protections affirmed in SEC v. Jerkesy, which found that administrative enforcement proceedings seeking punitive fines fall squarely within the definition of suits at common law and must be tried in federal court. Citing that ruling, Polinis asserts that the FCC's enforcement process of allowing only a written response and no hearing fails to meet constitutional standards and should be overturned. A white paper by former FCC Deputy General Counsel Peter Karangia, attached to the petition, supports this interpretation and warns that most FCC forfeiture actions may now be unconstitutional unless Congress reforms the agency's enforcement powers. When Polinis's fine was affirmed by FCC vote in September, then Commissioner Nate Symington dissented, citing similar reasoning. At the time, Symington said under new and controlling Supreme Court precedent, the Commission's authority to assess monetary forfeitures, as it traditionally has done, is unclear. Until the Commission formally determines the bounds of its enforcement authority under this new precedent, I am obligated to dissent from any decision purporting to impose a monetary forfeiture. I call on the Commission to open a notice of inquiry to determine the new constitutional contours of Commission enforcement authority. While Polinice's petition leans heavily on recent constitutional rulings, it's unlikely the FCC will grant reconsideration. The agency has not indicated any intention to revise its enforcement practices in light of jarcossy, and no legal action has been filed, at least not yet, by Polinice's team. If jarcossy were applied to FCC pirate radio enforcement, it could upend the agency's ability to impose civil penalties against unlicensed broadcasters, effectively stripping the FCC of its primary enforcement tool. Such a shift would leave the Commission with few practical consequences for violators, aside from seizure of equipment or criminal referral in rare cases. Still, no pirate broadcaster has ever successfully challenged the FCC in court. While Polinice's petition raises high-stakes constitutional questions, it also underscores the legal uncertainty surrounding the future of administrative enforcement in broadcast regulation.
It is time once again for AMSAT satellite shorts from all over. We begin this week with news that the European Space Agency Telesat and the Science and Technology Facility Council's RAL Space have reported a groundbreaking milestone in telecommunications technology, successfully establishing a Q-band link over low Earth orbit satellites between the RAL Space Chilcotin Observatory and the Telesat LEO-3 demonstration satellite. Q-band covers the 38 through 39 GHz band. A Q-band receiver was mounted on Chilcotin Observatory's large 25-meter dish. The team at the observatory used this radar tracking capability to monitor the state of the satellite and its orbit during each pass. The team established a stable link with co-located Ka-band uplink antenna to the Telesat LEO-3 satellite. The Telesat LEO-3 satellite also provided frequency upconversion to Q-band, amplification and retransmission to ground. The Telesat satellite station transmitted a DVB's signal. And our final story this week comes from AMSAT South Africa, who has just announced that its 2025 Space Symposium will be held on August 2, 2025, and has issued the first call for papers. The theme of the symposium is embracing 68 years of space science innovation in amateur radio. Papers are invited covering all aspects of space science and communication impacting and enhancing the amateur radio experience from the technical to operational aspects. Presentations are typically 30 minutes with a 10-minute question and answer period. Send your proposals in MS Word to admin@amsatasa.org.za. The symposium will be held online on WebEx.
Youth on the Air Junior Camp USA, the younger sibling of Youth on the Air in the Americas, is preparing to welcome campers for the first time this month. And you can too, by working them when they get on the air. The debut session of this camp is being hosted by the Westchester Amateur Radio Association at the National Voice of America Museum of Broadcasting in Westchester, Ohio. Youngsters under the age of 15 will be calling CQ with a special event call sign W8Y throughout the weekend of July 25th and at specially scheduled times. When they are not in the shack, the campers will be involved in radio-related activities similar to those at the regional Yoda camps for young people 15 through 25. You can participate too by watching the opening ceremony at 1700 UTC on Friday, July 25th on the Youth on the Air YouTube channel, where videos will highlight some of the day's activities. Of course, getting these youngsters in your log is the best way to support them. Be listening to the HF bands, especially at the following dedicated times. Friday, July 25th from 2230 to 0100 UTC. Saturday, July 26th from 1500 to 1600 UTC. And Sunday, July 27th from 2000 to 2100 UTC.
We pause for stations along the network to identify. We are This Week in Amateur Radio, available as a direct download on our website at www.twiar.net.
Amateur radio isn't the only activity that seeks good mileage from the sun. How about solar-powered automobiles? High school students are putting these homebrew vehicles to the test, and amateur radio is celebrating that challenge. The Texas Motor Speedway is the scene of the Solar Car Challenge, an event that has been encouraging high school students to experiment with alternative energy since 1993. According to a post in the QRZ.com forums, special event station Kilo 5 Sierra will be on 20 meters from the 17th to the 25th of July to celebrate the cars built by students from California, Florida, Washington State, Texas, and elsewhere. Listen for radio operators operating around 14.340 MHz for single sideband and 14.074 MHz for FT8. They'll be on the air from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. U.S. Central Time. The actual 4 days of the race are the 20th through the 23rd.
In India, hams helped a family reunite with a missing daughter they had long since given up for dead. The parents of a woman missing from West Bengal, India, for 8 years were reunited with her in early July by amateur radio operators after she was found in Bangladesh. Her parents told local media that she had disappeared from home 8 years ago, and they were convinced she had died during that time. Local media reports said that the woman, who is now 28 years old, has been determined to have mental health challenges. A report in Indian Express said to Muhammad Abdul Ghani Fitu, Sierra 21 Bravo Delta, a ham in Bangladesh, first spotted the woman at a railway station not far from the social services agency he operates. He told the newspaper that when he spoke with her, he was surprised to learn she was from India. He contacted amateurs in West Bengal and provided information about her home village and her parents' names, which she was able to provide. In West Bengal, Armbrish Nag Biswas, Victor Uniform 2 Juliet Fox Alpha, said he received the woman's photos and other details and asked Sanjib Sarma, a shortwave listener who belongs to the West Bengal Radio Club, to assist by locating her parents. They were tracked down the next day, and following a video call between them and her daughter, arrangements were made by the government authorities for her eventual return after a medical condition could be further assessed and managed.
This Week in Amateur Radio is holding open auditions for news anchors for the weekly national worldwide amateur radio news service. If you have a good radio voice and can reliably read provided news copy, we are looking for you. This, of course, is an all-volunteer position. An amateur radio license is not required. You must have a high-quality microphone, headset mics are not used, and be familiar with audio editing software to record and edit your finished news stories before uploading. If you would like to try out for a weekly or bi-weekly anchor position with North America's premier amateur radio news on air and podcast, please send an email to our producer, George, W2XBS. You can include a sample MP3 of yourself reading news copies sent as an attachment to W2XBS77@gmail.com. That's whiskey, the number 2, X-ray Bravo Sierra 77@gmail.com. Be sure and use Anchor Audition in the subject line. Please include your phone number and a good window of time for a callback to discuss your submission and our operating logistics to see if This Week in Amateur Radio is a good fit for you. We hope to hear from you soon.
Our final story isn't exactly a news leak, but let's just say we really can't hold it much longer. Are you sitting down? Well, it's time to lift the lid on the news. Toilets on the Air is coming in August. If you happen to be in the New York City area that month, well, you gotta go. You just gotta go. The amateur radio contest was begun by George, DH5GH, at the Chaos Communications Congress, a hacker conference in Germany. It is making its debut in the United States at the Hope 16 conference in New York City in August. Because Hope is a hub for hackers and innovators, contest organizer Todd Mazurski, KE2AEQ, thought this venue would be perfect to launch a creative challenge to licensed hams there. Activators select designated restrooms on the campus of St. John's University to make the most CW, voice, and digital contacts, with others on 2 meter and 70 centimeters. Activators are permitted to sit or stand while they're doing their business while holding their HTs. But they must be outside the restroom doors and a few meters away. They can only go inside the bathroom for the usual reasons. Yes, you heard that right. Bathroom breaks are okay. Now that's a relief. Todd announced the contest on his blog. So did Thomas Witherspoon, K4SWL. It's posted on his site, the appropriately named QRpeer.com.
This Week in Amateur Radio is heard around the country and around the world on great repeater systems like the CQ0UTRZ repeater on 439.175 MHz in Sierra Aristal in Portugal, covering Porto to Lira. Many of the news and information items heard in this edition of This Week in Amateur Radio have been provided by the American Radio Relay League, the ARRL Audio News Service, and the ARRL Letter, AMSAT, the Radio Amateurs of Canada, the Shortwave Listening Post, the Federal Communications Commission, the Radio Society of Great Britain, and Ofcom, the South African Radio League, the International Amateur Radio Union, the Wireless Institute of Australia and the Australian Communications and Media Authority, the New Zealand Association of Radio Transmitters, the Amateur Radio Newsline, the Rain Hamcast, Eric Guth, 4Z1UG and QSO Today, QRZ.com, the International Telecommunications Union, the 425DX News, Parks on the Air, and the Soda Reflector, and various news sources on the Internet.
With special thanks to all our weekly news sources and to you, our listeners, that wraps up this edition of This Week in Amateur Radio. If you'd like to write to us, you can find everything you need, including archive editions of the news service, at our website at twiar.net. And now, for all of us at This Week in Amateur Radio headquarters and our news team around the world, this is Chris Perrine, KB2FAF, wishing you a 73.